Well, one of the directors of power company AGL confirmed what we all basically already knew today, and that is that Australia's green energy targets are pie in the sky. Former Sydney Water boss and the previous chairwoman of the New South Wales Net Zero Emissions and Clean Economy Board, try saying that 4 times fast, Kerry Schott is her name. She's now on the board of AGL. Now, she's worked in the energy sector for a long time. She argues that Australia should be fast-tracking its transition to renewable energy. She believes in all this green dream stuff, but we'll leave that to one side for a moment. She was speaking at a conference hosted by the Australian Institute of Company Directors in Sydney today and said, quote, "Getting to 82% renewable is a big challenge and we are probably running late." 82% is the target the federal government has set in order to reduce carbon emissions by 43% by the end of the decade. Ms Schott continued, "We need to rapidly increase the transmission system so renewables can plug into it." Now, this is the big problem. The Australian energy market operator says we don't have the power lines to move around all this renewable energy that we're supposed to be creating. Now, the federal government has committed to building 10,000 kilometres of new power lines as part of a $20 billion plan, but the cost of putting up and maintaining power lines is a large part of what comes through in your power bills. The cost of power lines can make up anywhere from a third to even half of your power bill. Now, perhaps we're due a reminder of what's meant to be happening to your power bills.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
To be honest, I don't think you can play that too many times in this discussion, but as it stands, we're going to build all of these power lines and the cost will ultimately be passed on to you. Now, power poles and wires are what are called regulatory assets, which in simple terms means the energy regulator guarantees a return on investment to the investor that builds the infrastructure, which is usually one of the big power companies. The regulator indexes that to account for inflation and depreciation of the assets, which creates a real rate of return at the moment of about 3.5%. So for the power companies and their shareholders, that makes building poles and wires a very attractive proposition because you're basically guaranteed by the government regulator a return on investment that is recouped from us, the consumer. It's risk-free money, basically a cash cow at our expense for investors. So the more power lines they put up, the more profit they're guaranteed, basically, in perpetuity. And yet we are told that renewables will be cheaper. The Victorian Energy Policy Centre rubbished this idea that we need all these new power lines earlier in the year. At the time, its director, Bruce Mountain, said, quote, "The public has been repeatedly told that the transition to renewables will mean lower prices. With AEMO, the energy market operator, at the helm, the opposite will happen. Instead of making the best use of the wonderful grid we already have, AEMO wants the community and renewable generation developers to wait on it to deliver its monumental plans. Its own analysis shows that the most monumental thing about its plans is the amount of time, natural resources and money it wastes." Building all this renewable energy costs a bomb. We know that. It costs a bomb to begin with. And as Ms Schott acknowledged today, we're already behind schedule in terms of doing that to try and meet the federal government's emission reduction targets. But then you add on top of that this push to build more and more expensive power lines, which delays things even further and drives up the costs even more. So we're killing ourselves, spending shed loads of money, driving households to the wall with ever-increasing power bills to achieve an emissions reduction target that energy experts like Ms Schott say we are unlikely to hit in time. What are we doing all this for? It is a slow, self-inflicted economic and energy security suicide. We produce 1% of the world's CO2 emissions, and we have some of the most expensive electricity in the world. We set emissions targets that drive up that cost further to reduce that 1% of carbon dioxide, but we can't make those targets in time, so people in the energy sector tell us we need to spend even more money, which will increase your bills further. And it's nothing short of a sick joke, of which we, of course, are the butt. And by the way, the energy market operator says we need a 9-fold increase in wind and solar capacity by 2050 to meet the nation's net zero emissions targets. So we're already behind schedule, we're already spending a bomb, and we apparently need to do this 9 times over. And make no mistake, we are in big trouble. Now, I'm sure this isn't the point Ms Schott was trying to make today. She was trying to say, as I just pointed out, that we need to go harder. But what she has unwittingly admitted is the folly and the futility of this rush to renewable energy. Now, the biggest shareholder of AGL, where Ms Schott, of course, is a board member, is Atlassian CEO Mike Cannon-Brookes. Now, he's a full-blown member of the renewable energy religion, and at the same event today, he said AGL was one of the most toxic companies on the planet because of how much it emits. Since he bought 11% of the company last year, he's been pushing hard for it to move away from coal-fired power generation and into renewables. He's basically stacked the AGL board in his favour. Now, this bloke is one of the richest people in the country. Why do you reckon a bloke who's worth about $12 billion US, 19 billion Australian, would want one of the country's biggest energy companies to move from coal to renewables? Now, maybe I'm cynical, but I'm going to say it has something to do with the fact he thinks that's where he, as a shareholder, can make the most money. And that should tell you everything you need to know. Meanwhile, AGL boss Damien Nicks is clearly cognisant of the agenda Cannon-Brookes is driving, and he told the Financial Review yesterday that his company is, quote, going as fast as we can to reduce emissions. But going as fast as they can is, by the admission of one of his board directors, Kerry Schott, not fast enough to meet the government's targets. Again, why are we doing this to ourselves? Australia's supposed transition to renewable energy is a failure, and an expensive one at that. There's nothing wrong with there being renewable energy in the mix, so long as it is economically viable not just for the producer, but also the consumer. I have to tell you, if you thought power prices were bad now, just wait and see what happens if we actually try to meet these outlandish emissions targets.